you can see it in people's eyes, the fear. Fear. My husband is 68 years old, Tim. He has sleep apnea. The man stops breathing multiple times throughout the night with the CPAP machine. He has high blood pressure and arthritis, which is an autoimmune disease. And then myself, after fighting a fire, didn't know it at the time, but we had fought a fire at our property in Verbena, and it was a terrible experience. A couple of days there, our renters who had been there years and years before that experience had dumped chemicals into a pit, and we fought that fire for hours and hours, just dumping water in that. Well, a few months later, just in a routine medical exam, Dr. Amy, chest x-ray, saw some tissue in my lungs that she wasn't pleased with. So she sent me for a deeper study, and she, since that time, routinely monitors that tissue without my even bringing it up. And then there's our daughter, and she was living with a couple who were having symptoms just like Tim's, and some of them do vary from person to person, so it's hard to pinpoint exactly without the testing. But basically the fevers and the fatigue are the bottom line, some abdominal cramping. And then her employer, Beth Irwin, and we share about Tim's exposure and how he got this, attending an event that the virus decided to attend as well, and how we believe our story is a gift from God to encourage other people. Just the way things happened, it's just amazing. God gave us a story to share with you to help you find encouragement as well. But Beth had been running a fever, and so she sought to be tested, and her symptoms were not extreme enough for them to comply with her request. And the testing kits at that time, it was early on, were not readily available. So when she did start feeling better, they went on with their plans to go to Florida. And so Melissa drove her car down there, her van, and the family took a different vehicle. Melissa Ann was in the same home that they were in the whole time. And she was very much with the family, a part of the family, doing family things. And so at no time, though, at any point in this, did I feel any fear. One of the most difficult aspects of having the COVID experience personally is the storm of emotions, and it's not fear. When you first find out that you have a positive diagnosis, Tim and I both were charged by law with the responsibility of notifying everybody with whom we had come into contact that he had tested positive. Well, when you start sharing that, some people are fine, with it, like, okay, I'll just watch out and see what happens. And other people, there's a wall of distrust and fear, and some even accusing. One man, I think his experience pretty well described ours. His was the ground zero patient in Franklin, Tennessee, and he shared that the stigma that was attached to it, people wanting to know where he lived. And, some people have been threatened and about getting near them, and like people would do that, and like we would do that. And then beyond that, as you share with other people, some get angry because your experience isn't as extreme as what they're seeing on the television. It doesn't validate what they're experiencing through the media. And they get angry, or just, some have even severed ties because of that. And, it's like, well, we're fine, we're good. All of the people that we know who have had it are good. And it wasn't a pleasant experience, but it wasn't as bad as when Melissa Ann had type B flu and she wasn't able to get up out of the bed for days except when she had to. And her temperatures were much higher for days. Her she just kind of flatlined. She was down. But with the COVID, it was up and down, back and forth, feeling good. By the time Tim was tested, he was feeling good. And then, you know, he started having a, low-grade fever again and a little more fatigue, and it went back and forth. But nothing huge spiked after that. But one of the most difficult aspects is people feeling like they have to share information with you. Don't do this. Don't do this to people. Don't do this to anyone. If you share a story, you make sure it's true. You get all of the details. And if they're going through it and it's a negative story, just kind of keep your mouth shut because they're going to hear enough as it is. I had a call one day and they said, Connie, all of the medical workers in New York City, they have COVID. They're coming down with this virus and they're dying. They're just falling out. They're dying. Well, okay, that incites anxiety in your heart and mind. So you start thinking it out. Melissa Ann is in Florida with the Irwins. Tim is in Birmingham, and I'm here at the lake. What do I do with this? You accept the fact that God has you strategically positioned where He wants you to be in such a time as this. And that works. Fear. I started thinking about Matthew 24 and Jesus describing the last days. He said there will be wars and rumors of wars and earthquakes in diverse places. Well, there have been 2 earthquakes in America that made people stand up and take notice as well in this season. And, he lists these things that are going to happen, and persecution. Persecution hasn't happened yet, but it will because He said it would. And then He said, in the midst of all this, see to it that you are not afraid. And then in John, He says, you are my friends if you do what I say. So I want to be a friend of God. And God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son. How do I show respect and reverence for that? I'm going to choose not to fear. So, after that was settled, I want the truth. I want the facts. Our people, are these medical personnel all dying in New York? And this was days and days ago. This was when we were still walking through. Melissa was in Florida and we were walking through it. And so I looked up online and I found the sad story of a young nurse, and he had died with COVID. And in digging to get the full truth in the story, I learned that his sister had noted that he had severe asthma. And that's not a good disease to have with this. So this part of you starts feeling, oh, well, look at him, he had this. And then you have to fight the darkness in your heart that somebody, their experience was darker than yours. Their physical condition was not a good thing to have with this. Neither was Tim's. But you can't find any relief in that. That's the point. I have since found one more case of a physician who is 60 years old who is treating COVID patients, and he's an ER doctor, and he did die, and they believe it was from the disease, so he was not tested in the article that I read. That's what they suspect because he did start manifesting those symptoms. But he was 60 years old, and he had survived cancer twice. So in doing this, you have to check the darkness in your heart. You can't take comfort because these people had underlying medical conditions that made their case be worse. But what you do want is the truth. Are all people, medical personnel in New York dying? No. But then in checking out statistics, wanting to know how this virus played out, I went to the CDC website, and one thing I discovered was just shocking to me, and that is about the seasonal flu. Okay, so back in the 2017-2018 years and then the 2018-2019 season, we had over 80 million cases of flu. 80 million. At the time that I was doing this research, had not even been 500,000 cases of COVID worldwide, and you couldn't find toilet tissue. We had 80 million cases of flu, and in those 2 seasons, we had almost 100,000 deaths. We had 95,256 deaths. And that's a flu that have impacted the children and the teens and young people as well. And so I just wondered, how could almost 100,000 people die in 2 flu seasons and it not even enter the public conversation? It wasn't focused. We didn't talk about, I don't remember anybody saying we need to pray about this, because the media wasn't telling us that we needed to focus on this. And so it began to disturb me. And again, can't take any consolation that there are statistics there that demonstrate a staggering number of deaths. It's like, okay, people are dying all around us. And digging deep into this, over 100,000 people who smoke and vape or are exposed to secondhand smoke will die every year. Now, the statistics for lung cancer are higher. They're closer to 150,000 every year, but 80% of them are smoking, related to smoking and secondhand smoke. That's a staggering number of people to lose every year. So I guess what I'm saying, having experienced it from this end and walking through it and really not fearing, knowing that God writes our story, I can't change the date of my death. Our life is an assignment. Our death is an appointment. Our days are numbered. Before we draw our first breath and before we take our last breath, God knows. And it's in the scripture. Even Jesus, when he was about to be sent to the cross, there were times when he was in the temple and they were angry and they wanted to kill him, but they couldn't. He was protected because his time had not yet come. And when he spoke with his disciples, they were talking and he said, "Can you accept the cup that I'm about to drink?" And they had no idea what he was talking about. And they were like, "Sure, Lord, yes, we've got this." And he's like, "Indeed you will." Because he knew that their destiny was to be martyred for the advancement of the kingdom. And so it's what you do with the first breath to the last breath that matters. We can't change the date of our death, and no virus can change the date of our death, and nothing can change that. God knows. So our assignment in this process is to inspire faith, not fear. Let's look at the big picture of this. Yes, many people are having horrible stories, and that is sad, and we need to tune into that, but we also need the bigger picture. When you watch a news item, really, really watch it. Listen to it. Take notes, and then think about what's said. Okay, Tim was invited to be a part of a news clip, and he went in and they caught him out by surprise. And so he shared his story. He said, "I have no idea what I said." When he got out, he was really nervous that he was gonna, be embarrassed by what he had said and that he would embarrass the whole family. And I was like, it's okay, it's good. God is gonna use this. So he ended up doing the interview, and the only part they kept in was the fact that he had a temperature of 102, and he had made them agree that they would keep in his remark about God, and they did that. So those were the 2 things they kept in, and the main gist of this interview was about the testing, and so that was fine, but still the element of the mildness of the experience was missed by anyone who would see this interview. But what wasn't missed by me, I wonder how many people did miss this. first, they open the news talking about this deadly, destructive virus. And it is, just like the seasonal flu was. And then a few moments later, it spoke of the staggering number of cases in one Shelby County nursing home. But this is what you need to hear. 15 residents tested positive in this nursing home. These would have been your elderly patients. Well, only 2 demonstrated symptoms. 7 employees tested positive and 4 had symptoms. They tested in mid-March, the same time that Tim had been tested. And at that time, though, none of them were critical or serious. Had they been, we would have known about it. Just because you receive a positive diagnosis doesn't mean you have a death sentence. And that's been the tension point of most of the people we have talked with. They have treated us like I needed to, here's the number for the funeral home. You need to go ahead and start making arrangements. Okay, again, 95% of the people who get this, that's not their story. So let's start looking for 100% of the story. It's very important because what is happening in our nation today, in Indiana, their emotional care hotline has gone from 1,000 calls per day to 25,000 calls per day. Cancer patients have their surgeries, their treatment. A lot of them just diagnosed with cancer, they're on hold. A friend has a family member with heart issues, or they can't really do the testing on him right now. We need to really think about how we're handling this. How are we handling it? Fear or faith? So here's the challenge. I want you to contact 3 people every day and inspire faith. Because without faith, it's impossible to please God. Faith impacts our physical condition. Faith impacts how we respond to life. Faith, it impacts how we deal with other people. So it's our time. We were born for such a time as this. So let's do this. Start right now. That's it.